Shalom, shalom. You're listening to Live Internet Studies. This is episode number 325. My name is Ariel ben-Lyman, HaNaviy. Let's open with a quick word of prayer. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. Lord, by the time this recording goes out into the public, we'll probably be in the middle of Hanukkah, or we might even be past Hanukkah, depending on when this has already hit the public world. I thank you, Lord, for the biblical truths and the promises that Hanukkah represents. Even though it is not a biblically mandated feast, it came along later than the Levitical feasts. But there doesn't seem to be any harm in participating in Hanukkah, no theological harm participating in Hanukkah. So I encourage Christians who aren't Jewish to give Hanukkah a try. You can still celebrate it right along Christmas if that's what you're used to doing, Christmas. But why not give Hanukkah a try and investigate what the message of Hanukkah is trying to communicate? And as a Jew, I can say that Hanukkah has a very biblically grounded message that it's trying to communicate. And the takeaway that I get, Lord, is that even in the midst of our unfaithfulness, you are faithful. And that you preserve us in ways that we can't even imagine. You rescue us from our enemies, and you set us high on places. You raise us up to places as a people group, Israel, even when we don't deserve it. And so I thank you, Lord, that you have preserved us, and that you're keeping us, and that you're protecting us as a people. And this now extends theologically to the grafted in Gentiles. So it's not just an ethnic thing. It's not just a Jewish thing. But thank you, Lord, for Hanukkah. Bless us tonight during this study as we, as always, embark on topics that are beyond the complete understanding of the teacher. I rely on you, Holy Spirit, to explain these things to me, just like I'm explaining them to the students. But I pray that the truths that are conveyed will be truths that you have revealed to people, and that when people are changed and blessed, it's because of your work, Yeshua, not because of some clever wording that I've created in my own commentary. I'll be careful, Lord, to give you the praise and glory, B'Shem Yeshua. Amen. Thank you, everyone, for joining me for these live studies week after week. They are an hour and a half long. There's two segments. First segment is Eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events. We're going to jump into that shortly. The second segment is 30 minutes, and it goes by the name of A Trinitarian Response to Biblical Unitarianism. It's apologetic in nature. We tackle Trinitarian topics and verses, and I've created an imaginary opponent called biblicalunitarian.com, which in real life is a real website, but I'm not doing a live debate with them. But we are wrestling back and forth over certain passages, and right now we're still in the Gospels, very early in the book of Matthew, because we just really started into the New Testament passages. So stick around for that topic if you are interested. Okay, let's jump right into the eschatology study. As you can see on your screen, we've been working our way down through these topics, and we're at the yellow slice where it says Topic 14, Mystery Babylon, Discussion Part 2. Technically, the discussion has already come to a conclusion. We have hit 8 weeks of essay that I created on this discussion of Mystery Babylon, working primarily from this particular book that you can see on your screen called Mystery Babylon, When Jerusalem Embraces the Antichrist, an exposition of Revelation 17 and 18. And it's written by a Christian author by the name of Chris White. He's a fellow pre-wrather such as myself, a futurist such as myself. And he holds the position that Mystery Babylon in the book of Revelation is eschatological Jerusalem. Choosing his words carefully, he's not saying that it's Jerusalem right now, nor was it Jerusalem of the first century, or something to that effect, like a preterist would imagine. He's saying that there's going to come a day when the Antichrist and Jerusalem form some kind of covenant or bond or agreement that allows the Antichrist to have access and control to Jerusalem in a way that perhaps she is not really anticipating. She certainly doesn't know that he's Antichrist when she first enters into this agreement with him. But this will kind of pave the way for prophetic events that are foretold where the Antichrist will take a seat in the temple and declare himself to be God. There have been other candidates proposed for Mystery Babylon down through the ages. Modern cities like New York, Rome, Vatican City, Middle Eastern cities like Mecca or Medina or Qatar or something like that. Those all come up as candidates from time to time. Mystery Babylon has also even been described as rebuilt Babylon, as in Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon come back to life, meaning like Saddam Hussein's Babylon. So there's some different candidates, and arguably Jerusalem as a candidate raises a lot of red flags for a lot of Christians for a lot of good reasons. So what we did last week is I went through my essay version of Chris White's book where he deals with those particular objections, and it wasn't meant to be extensive. My essay was just that. It's an essay. It's shortened. But what I've done, or what I have been doing for the last few months as I've been working through this, is while I've been simultaneously writing the essays each week, kind of getting those ready before I teach them, I've been also at the same time doing my own research and articulating what I feel might be another angle to think about how Mystery Babylon could turn out to be eschatological Jerusalem, and yet also, in the end, be redeemed as Jerusalem, right? There are a healthy amount of scriptures that teach that Mystery Babylon is going to be wiped out, never to rise again. And there are a healthy amount. I have a good friend who always makes a kind of a funny joke whenever I say a healthy amount. That pops into my head every now and then when I say that healthy amount. There are a healthy amount of passages that talk about, and I mean healthy, I mean a good number, that talk about Jerusalem being restored. So if Mystery Babylon is to be destroyed and Jerusalem is supposed to be restored, how can Jerusalem be Mystery Babylon? How can they both be the same entity? So what we are going to turn to tonight is this excursus that I wrote. I don't know if I will get through the entire excursus in this one sitting. I'm not in any rush, so if I don't get through it in one sitting, I'm okay with that. I'm also not imagining that this excursus is the final say in this particular topic. I'm putting this out here for the first time. Even my good study buddy, who's with me right now in the Teams class, he hasn't seen this information yet, as far as I know, and often I will review something with him before I even put it out to the rest of to the general public. This time I haven't even done that. I think, as far as I know, this will be the first time he's going to be seeing this as well. So I have not vetted this against Chris White's notes personally. I have not asked Chris White, what do you think about this opinion? But after I teach it, I'm willing to go, after I create the media for it, the audio files, the videos, I'm willing to reach out to Chris White and ask him what he thinks about it. And if he has the time, if he sees my email, I would be interested in hearing if my thesis matches his. I think they match. And I've even incorporated some of his information in this. So without further ado, let me jump into it. As typical, I've got these super long names to my excurses. This one's called, you ready for it? Here it goes. The Death and Rebirth of Jerusalem, a theological and eschatological study of Mystery Babylon, regeneration, and covenant transformation. And I like these big, long, meaty titles to my excurses because they make my paper sound so scholarly, right? Okay, just picking on myself. Okay, so here's the table of contents that we're going to be going through. I'm going to start out with the thesis that so you guys can understand where I'm going with my particular angle. And then we're going to move into point number 2, regeneration as the annihilation of an old identity. We're going to talk about how can the Bible be explaining that Mystery Babylon is going to be destroyed and at the same time promising with a surety that Jerusalem will live on and that she will become the city where God dwells and indeed the place that the Messiah will rule and reign from. How can they be the same identity? How can they be the same entity if one is going to cease to exist and the other is going to actually rise? So we're going to talk about this concept of regeneration as the annihilation of an old identity. Moving right into point number 2, where we see in the Bible Paul's 2 Jerusalems in covenantal displacement. hopefully this will start coming together for you. I didn't write this in an overly scholarly manner, but my writing is always more scholarly than the way I teach. So it will come across as somewhat scholarly. I'm trying to be serious, is my point. Point number 3, Paul's two Jerusalems, covenantal displacement. Point number 4, eschatological Jerusalem as mystery Babylon. And so then for those who weren't able to follow the entire 8-week essay study, maybe this is the only video that catches your attention because of the title and the topic. I pull in some more kind of summarized treatment of Jerusalem as mystery Babylon right here in point 5 again. Point 4. And then point 5, the paradox resolved, destruction and restoration. Moving to point 6, I think there's 9 points in this table of contents. Point 6, theological coherence. How do we bring it all together? Leading to a conclusion. And then, for the first time in my life, I've got an excursus inside of an excursus. The entire paper is an excursus. But inside of that excursus, I've got 2 excurses, right? Point number 8 is excursus, topographical transformation, and the physical death of Jerusalem. And that follows Chris White's research itself, his own thesis about how that mystery Babylon is eschatological Jerusalem. And then in the book, a major theme that he explores, or an angle to answer the theological objection to Jerusalem being the candidate of mystery Babylon, is the angle or the objection about the physical location where Jerusalem is being the site of mystery Babylon, yet also being the site of the new Jerusalem or the restored Jerusalem or something to that effect. How can they be the same spot? Right? The scriptures seem to contradict one another, or in other words, the Bible almost demands that the physical location where mystery Babylon will be cannot be the same physical location where restored Jerusalem will be. Something to that effect. And so Chris White went heavily in the book into the topographical transformation concept of future Jerusalem. And I didn't do that in my essay on purpose, by design. I just wanted to stick to more of the lighter theological issues and not go heavy into something of topography. But in this excursus, I decided I would go that direction. So we're going to pull that in point number 8. And then lastly, point number 9, like I said, excursus within an excursus. It's kind of like Inception, right? A dream within a dream. Excursus within an excursus. Everlasting desolation in Jeremiah 25:9, prophetic idiom, hyperbole, and covenant historical finality. All right, because I decided I'd pick on one of the major verses in the Tanakh that talks about, that uses language about the destruction of mystery Babylon, or even Babylon itself, of which I'm hoping you are following along with the idea by now that mystery Babylon in the New Testament borrows themes and wording from the destruction of both Babylon in the Old Testament, as well as the judging of Jerusalem in the Tanakh. Those 2 cities, and Tyre. Tyre also gets pulled into this language. All 3 of those cities get kind of characterized by John and form the language that he uses when we read about the destruction of mystery Babylon in Revelation. So this is the table of contents that you're looking at. Those are the topics we're going to talk about, and you can see even just from the table of contents that it's more content than I can handle in 1 week. Maybe even a month's worth of content. Like I said, I'm not rushing. Okay, let's jump into the first one. Let me go back up because these are hot linked, and I like to do that. Okay, let me explain my thesis to you, where I'm going with how I'm answering these objections to mystery Babylon being eschatological Jerusalem. All right, I'm going to just highlight like this, and in the final production version, perhaps there won't be as much infographic representation as there are in some of my videos. Maybe not a lot of fancy B-roll footage pictures of Jerusalem and other fancy graphics and things like that. Because of the nature of this particular excursus, I want my students to be able to see the notes that I'm using. So for this reason, you don't see the things that say like timings that I didn't put those in this time because I don't anticipate this to be that kind of teaching. I want you to be able to follow along with me just line by line like I normally do. So pay attention to the screen is my point. That's where what you see is what you're going to get primarily. All right. And I'll try not to follow side rabbit trails and chase after rabbis and things like that. Okay. In this study, I argue, going from Chris White's thesis that I launched from, I argue that Revelation's portrayal of the total destruction of Mystery Babylon, understood as eschatological Jerusalem, can be interpreted as the annihilation of the city's corrupted covenantal identity rather than the erasure of the city's ontological existence. My very first sentence should tip us into the direction of where I'm going right out of the gate to help you understand the angle I'm taking. I go on to say this proposal corresponds to biblical patterns of personal regeneration, covenantal transformation, and Israel's promised future renewal. And I have found that when viewed through this lens, Revelation's language of absolute finality describes the irrevocable end of Jerusalem's harlot identity so that the redeemed Jerusalem of the millennium and ultimately the New Jerusalem can emerge. So think about where I'm going for a moment. We're talking about a city who's corrupt, who at the moment isn't playing that part, but will in the future, which will then lead to God judging her physically, right? There will be physical judgments, but it will be primarily a spiritual judgment on her wickedness, a spiritual judgment on her infidelity to God, her harlotry. And in so doing, the purpose for God to judge his own bride, you remember my thesis of holding to Chris White's thesis is that we're talking about Jerusalem as the harlot, which means right out of the gate, she's supposed to be the faithful bride to God, but she's playing the harlot. And we don't have to question her covenantal identity in God's eyes in the sense of her being his bride. The shocker is that she's playing the harlot, but who's the she? So my angle is that, which is consistent with biblical pictures that we find elsewhere. I'm just going to help you see what I've seen. And I hope that you'll agree with me using this particular angle that it is completely plausible under this using this angle that Mystery Babylon can absolutely end up being eschatological Jerusalem, and then at the same time God will judge her and redeem her, and then she's his faithful bride again. So this is the direction that we're going to go. So I will hope this helps you with the objections that you have, particularly. And I'll say this, then I'll jump into the next paragraph. Joel Richardson, I watched him debate with Chris White, and I've watched Joel Richardson's videos over and over. And a lot of his primary objections to Chris White's thesis of end-time Jerusalem being Mystery Babylon is the very angle that I'm addressing. And so this would really be nice if Joel Richardson himself could watch these videos and read this particular excursus that I'm going to be putting forth here. Because I think, Mr. Richardson, if you consider the position that I'm presenting here, I think you'll find that it has good biblical consistency and representation and fidelity, and it has a lot of, as Pastor Mark McClellan at my home congregation say, has a lot of traction. And I think it's a very workable angle and not easily dismissed. Okay, so let's keep going. Point number 2, regeneration as the annihilation of an old identity. Okay, follow along carefully. I don't think I'm teaching heresy, and it's not too far-fetched to articulate what I'm going to explain, because it's actually right there in the Bible, and we already know it, but we just haven't made the connection to Mystery Babylon before, I believe, the way that I'm going to do now. And to my knowledge, Chris White did not explore this angle in his book. And if he has explored this angle since, because he's constantly seeking to update his understanding of any given topic, perhaps he has written what we might call an updated edition to his book, and maybe he included this angle. I didn't see it the first time I read his book. Okay. A consistent biblical theme is the destruction of an old identity without eliminating the underlying person or people. All right. This is important for us to picture as it relates to imagining that Jerusalem is this person that undergoes this major transformation without losing her the underlying framework of the ontological entity that she truly is. So follow along. Notice this quote from Paul in 2 Corinthians 5:17, referring to us believers. And this is a familiar quote. Therefore, if anyone is in Messiah, he's a new creature. The old things passed away, behold, new things have come. Stop and think about that for a moment. As I say in my notes here, the individual in this passage does not cease to exist. Namely, it's the old identity that's abolished, but the person themselves is the same person. So ontologically, which is the fancy word that deals with the existence of beings and things. So that's what I mean by ontologically. When I was born, I was the guy that's talking to you right now. When I was born, when I came into the world as a baby, I had the same fingerprints that I did then that I do now. At least I think so. I don't think fingerprints drastically change. My point is, the guy that's talking to you right now is the same guy that was brought into the world almost 60 years ago. Yes, I am that old. And the point I'm trying to bring through my study is that when I became saved, a new Ariel didn't suddenly be born. It wasn't pushed back into the womb and then brought back in afresh with a new set of fingerprints, a new face. It wasn't like that. It's the same guy. I'm the same guy. I'm physically speaking, nothing changed. But Paul tells us that old things passed away, behold, new things have come. The KJV, I think, says all things have become new. So it leaves us wondering what actually gets renewed. Now, as Christians, this is a no-brainer question. We know what gets renewed. It's the old nature. It's the old man. It's the old covenant standing before God. It is completely new. The old has died in Messiah. The death is final. The death is complete. The death is effectual. The death is real. And yet, the person that you're seeing didn't change out. The physical guy didn't swap out. But in God's eyes, I've got a new identity. So Paul can therefore speak of being crucified with the Messiah, quote unquote, while still living in the same verse, right? Because Christ died, I now live, or I now live because Christ died. And the life I live in the Spirit. I'm paraphrasing a bunch of verses here. And Christ's death resulted in my death. But since Christ lives again, I also live with Christ. So I died with Christ and I live with Christ. So Paul didn't physically die in Messiah. It was more of a spiritual death. The covenantal position switched out, right? He's no longer an old man. He's a new man. The language reflects a real annihilation of the former self, yet the continuity of the subject remains intact, is my point I'm trying to stress. It's not a difficult concept, and it's not one that requires a twisting of Scripture. It's simply we articulate what takes place at the individual level, and what I'm going to do, as I say in my next paragraph here, is that this pattern, I believe, can extend to Israel corporately. And then eventually, we're going to see how this plays out for Jerusalem. So Ezekiel 36 to 37 describes the nation as spiritually dead, likened to dry bones. It's a famous prophecy, dry bones prophecy. But God in his mercy raises those bones. They're raised by divine breath into new life. God breathes his breath into the dry bones. Ezekiel records this. And the nation comes back to life. Now, what gives? What I notice is that the nation is not replaced. God doesn't breathe life into the dry bones and they become a brand new people, only with the same name. There's no replacement theology going here. He doesn't breathe life into Israel and suddenly it's the church. That doesn't take place. He doesn't breathe life into Israel and suddenly they become the Germans or something like that. It's still the covenant people of Israel. It's just that they were spiritually dead and God breathes his life into them. The nation's not replaced. Rather, its old condition dies and its renewed covenantal identity emerges. Right? You see this in Scripture individually, but one day we're going to see this happen to Israel as a nation. Israel's transformation includes receiving a new heart and spirit, yet Israel itself persists through the process. I'm fond of quoting the Ezekiel 36 passage because it is there where God explains the transformation. I'll give you a new heart. I'll give you a new spirit. I'll take out the heart of stone and replace it with a heart of flesh. This is covenantal language. And in so doing, I'll cause you, God says, to walk in my ways, and you'll keep my statutes and things like that. And you will become the righteous bride that I envisioned all along. Only after this radical heart transplant takes place, the dry bones will live. So we've seen this on an individual level. If you're a believer, you know how this works. It's not something new. And yet I'm telling you that we should have applied this to Israel all along. And yet it's been here right in front of our face. How Jerusalem can be, eschatological Jerusalem can be Mystery Babylon, playing the harlot like she did in the past, until God finally says, enough is enough. I'm going to bring an everlasting righteousness, like he explained to Daniel in chapter 9. And in this transformative process, you will finally be the bride that you have covenantally been designed to be, created to be, partnered to be. God has envisioned Israel being this way from the get-go, but she just didn't get it. And she's been living in this state for a long time, but she will not persist in this state into eternity. God will have his way with his people, even if he has to eliminate 2/3 of them in the process. Very tragic. Let's keep going. This biblical logic of regeneration is foundational for understanding exactly how God transforms individuals, such as individual Christians, as well as covenant communities, such as eschatological Israel will turn out to be. So let's move into this analogy that we find in Paul directly. This is really nice because I did a study on Galatians. I wrote a very lengthy, I guess it's a book. It's a paper, but it could easily be a book. On the book of Galatians, it's available on my website. It's called Exegeting Galatians. And in there, in chapter 6, we find Paul giving this chapter 6. We find Paul giving this description of two Jerusalems. We're like, what? What in the world is going on there? Okay. You remember I told you a long time ago at the beginning of my eschatological study that this was a tale of two cities. I even jokingly put a thumbnail in front of you that's using Garfield's, the image from Garfield's movie from some time back, Garfield, the cartoon cat, that Garfield. And the movie was called A Tale of Two Kitties, for you cat lovers out there. I'll flash it in post-production again so you can see how cute it was. Well, Revelation really is the tale of two cities. There's the city of New Jerusalem, and then there's the city of Mystery Babylon. I'm telling you that the two cities are one city. It's just that there's two covenant identities that are being portrayed. It's kind of like a tale of two men, Clark Kent versus Superman. Well, is it really two men? Yeah, we got two public identities. The world doesn't know that Clark Kent is Superman. The world doesn't know that Superman is Clark Kent. At least they're not supposed to know, right? That's the angle. You know, a lot of people do know. Lex knows, right? Lois knows. And and a bunch of other people that he's revealed his identity to. Obviously, all of his friends know, everybody in the Justice League knows who Clark is, but the general public's not supposed to know. So from their perspective, there's two men, a tale of two men, Clark Kent and Superman. Well, imagine that scenario if we're talking about a tale of two cities, Mystery Babylon and New Jerusalem. Yeah, but they're both the same city, right? Or to some degree. All right, so let's go in that direction. Paul talks about two Jerusalems, but in reality, there's only one Jerusalem. That's the kicker. Paul knew that there was only one Jerusalem, but he talks about them in terms of two. Paul applies the same framework, I say, specifically to Jerusalem in Galatians 4. Wow, I was way off. Why did I say 6? I don't know what I was thinking. I jump all over the place when I'm doing my Bible studies, and I just don't remember what chapter I'm in at any given moment sometimes. So it's Galatians 4. That's why I have notes, so I don't have to remember exactly where everything is. I can just read my notes. In Galatians 4, Paul distinguishes between, bullet point 1, the present earthly Jerusalem, the slave woman, and bullet point 2, the Jerusalem above, the free woman. Now, again, those of us who are Christians, we can begin to picture how that if you're a replacement theologian or supersessionist, like Steve Gregg recently debated Dr. Michael Brown, full-blown replacement theologian, proud of it, proud to teach that Israel has forfeited all of her promises and that there's no history for her, waiting for her, no future for her. The church has inherited all of those promises. The story here in Galatians 4 is consistent with his line of thinking, with his hermeneutic principle that the Jerusalem above displaces the slave woman, the present earthly Jerusalem. And in a weird sort of twist in his favor, I'm admitting that, yes, the theological point that Paul is raising is that when you get to the conclusion of Galatians 4, and I'm spoiling it for you if you've never read Galatians 4. I'm teasing you Christians out there. Of course you should have read Galatians. But if you've never read Galatians 4, the end of the story is that Paul instructs the free woman to cast out the slave woman. And so there is a displacement of some sort, but it's not the kind that you would have to spin into the angle known as replacement theology. So we've got these two women that are mentioned, which even though they're not completely named, one appears to be Sarah, Abraham's covenant wife, and the other appears to be Hagar, Abraham's handmaid, whom he took matters into his own hand and tried to bring the covenant promises to pass by bringing about Isaac, and thus he complicated the promises of God rather than bringing them about to pass. He introduced complication because he was operating in the flesh rather than operating by faith at that moment. And so Isaac did not turn out to be the covenant son. I'm sorry, let's try that one again. Ishmael did not turn out to be the covenant son. Isaac turned out to be the covenant son. And so this is where Paul is able to look back at the story in the book of Genesis and realize, wait a minute, I've got a midrash here, an allegory. He even introduces chapter 4 with that phrase about the allegories, like there's an allegory going on here. So then he cites the command that we find in the Bible, cast out the bondwoman and her son, Galatians 4:30. So notice the drastic transformation or the radical conclusion that Paul comes to. Cast out the bondwoman. Cast out, who is the bondwoman? Present earthly Jerusalem, the slave woman. Cast her out so that the Jerusalem above, the free woman, can remain. So let's flesh this out a little bit. What I say in my excursus here is that the casting out represents covenantal judgment, not necessarily geographical extinction. Although, when we get down into the section, we will have to admit that there will be radical topographical transformation, but not necessarily a complete destruction of geography. The old Jerusalem in her unbelieving state cannot inherit the promises. That's the whole point that Paul's trying to make. She is in a state of covenant standing before God that's irredeemable, meaning she has to die. It's not difficult for us to imagine this concept because we go through this transformation as individuals. The old man cannot stand before God because God is a holy God. The only option for me is to allow that old man to perish, to die, to pass away, and to be reborn in the blood of Messiah. And then I can stand before a holy God as a righteous individual, cleansed in the blood of Messiah, not because of works I've done, but because of the finished work that Messiah did on the cross on my behalf, that I have placed my faith in. And that's where the transformation takes place. And that's when I realize that the old man is dead. Even if old habits and proclivities still remain in my mind and in my body and in my volition, I live according to old desires, but I need not be that way. Paul explains this to me in the book of Romans. I need not yield my members to the old ways of life that I learned before I was redeemed. And yet, at the same time, again, I'm a new individual. So the old Jerusalem, in her unbelieving state, she cannot inherit the promises God gave to her. And yet the promises cannot fail that God is going to redeem Jerusalem and he's going to bless her in ways that she could never imagine. So in order for her to inherit the promises, the change has to take place in her. God doesn't have to change his promises to match her fallen state. God simply has to do the transformative work that he does for us on an individual level. That is, do the heart transplant, take out the heart of stone, put in the heart of flesh. Go back and read Ezekiel chapter 36 again. Correlate that with Romans that with Galatians 4 that we're going through here. So as I continue, she must be removed so that the Jerusalem above the redeemed and liberated identity can take her rightful place. This is not replacement theology, people. It's not supersessionism any more than the old replaces the new and God has no longer a covenant with the person. It's the same person, but a different covenant identity, right? It's not like the renewed Israel is actually the church and there's no more room for Israel as an identity. It's still Israel. That's why the names are still there, right? Jerusalem, even if eschatological Jerusalem is Mystery Babylon, she's still Jerusalem. She's just a harlot version of Jerusalem. She's an unfaithful bride, right? She's really testing God's grace and pushing the limits of his mercy when she finally makes a pact with Antichrist in the end. In fact, God allows her to understand that she is brought to the final fullness of her betrayal against God as his bride. She's gotten to the point where God says, it's time for you to finally break off this yoke of bondage that you've allowed yourself to carry, this deception that has blinded your eyes for so long. National Israel must be redeemed. And at this point in time right now, she's not righteous. She's not righteous. But she has to become the righteous covenant city that God envisions for her. This anticipates, I say in my notes, a future in which Jerusalem's present condition must end decisively before her eschatological fulfillment can arrive. And I go on to say that in this sense, Paul already establishes the necessity of a profound discontinuity between Jerusalem's old identity and her future redeemed status. So, Paul already has this in mind when he talks about the old city, the old version of Jerusalem has to be destroyed. And he doesn't have to have us mistakenly envision a complete annihilation of the geography of Israel, along with a major shift in, say, the location. Although, as we're going to find out when we get down to Kirschweit's contribution, again, I'm going to go a little further this time than I did in my essay. Kirschweit does remind us that there are Bible passages and chapters that envision some major topographical upgrades to Jerusalem one day in comparison to the rest of the world. I don't want to get ahead of myself. Let's just keep going now into my own excursus. So, point number 5, eschatological Jerusalem as Mystery Babylon. Okay, so how does this fit in with the thesis that Chris White is proposing and the thesis that I'm going with presently. This is my own current research that Mystery Babylon is eschatological Jerusalem. How does this work? Let's fit in the thesis that I'm proposing now about the radical covenantal spiritual transformation of Jerusalem into the bride that she's always meant to be by first bringing to death the identity that she currently is, namely the harlot Mystery Babylon. Building upon this pattern, I say I adopt the view that eschatological Jerusalem, under the domination or the dominion of the Antichrist, is the entity depicted in Revelation as Mystery Babylon. That's who Mystery Babylon is. It's eschatological Jerusalem. And like Chris White, I realize the necessity to carefully word who I'm saying this truly is. Eschatological. She isn't playing that part at the moment. I don't see all of the indicators that she's embraced Antichrist worship, beast worship, and that she's promulgating this to the rest of the world. I don't see that just yet. Doesn't seem to be playing out that way yet. But one day that could be the case. Or it could be one of those other cities. I could be wrong. But just follow along with me. I'm making this argument for the sake of Jerusalem, not for the sake of, say, New York, where this whole thesis that I'm proposing right now would kind of start falling apart. In fact, if it were another city other than Jerusalem, that's kind of the point, is I don't imagine that any of those other cities that were put forth as candidates, Mecca, Medina, Babylon, New York, Salt Lake City, Vatican City, Rome, name your Salt Lake City. I suppose that's not a coastal city, is it? Name your favorite coastal city or your favorite city that you love to hate that you think is going to go down when the time comes as big bad Mystery Babylon. The point in fact is that it's very difficult to tie any of those other candidates to being the covenant partner envisioned in the Bible as God's bride, who is breaking God's heart by playing the harlot and yet still must be redeemed because God doesn't break his promises that he made to the forefathers. God promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and David, and Moses, and the prophets, and us as a people. He promised us, and when I say us there, I mean both Israel and the church. He made promises that haven't yet fully been actualized yet. Some of them involve land portions, covenant responsibilities in his temple, serving him as his people in an everlasting position, priestly positions that we're going to be performing, and serving Yeshua, the Messiah, one day in person. Things that haven't come to pass. No matter who you are in Messiah right now, spiritually, there are physical promises that haven't yet happened. And because God doesn't renege on his part of the deal, he doesn't give up on the promises made to his people, no matter how unfaithful they become, then we still recognize that there's a relationship there that doesn't seem to be in place with some of those other cities. So let's look at eschatological Jerusalem as Mystery Babylon and work through this thesis and see if it fits. If my thesis here is right about the spiritual regeneration of Mystery Babylon, transforming her into the Jerusalem that she's supposed to be, which must take place and will take place under God's power, then this city, I say, bullet point number 1, as Mystery Babylon, she's responsible for the blood of the prophets and the saints. Right? We talked about this in the last eight weeks. Bullet point number 2, she's linked to the place where the Lord was crucified, Revelation 11:8. Mystery Babylon, Jerusalem, becomes a harlot figure through covenantal infidelity. Covenantal infidelity. That's what gives her the label Mystery Babylon. And remember, the word mystery is something that biblically was hidden in the past, but revealed in God's timing in the eschaton, in the future, or under the reign of Messiah, gradually unfolding as these last days are upon us, but yet still parts of mystery waiting to be revealed as the end times finally close in. So, John calls her Mystery Babylon, a mystery. What's so mysterious about her? Maybe the mystery is that she's been Jerusalem all along, and that's what's mysterious about her. But not revealed in the Tanakh, but later revealed as prophecy unfolds, when the time is right to understand that she has been Jerusalem all along. That's consistent with the thesis that teaches that it's Jerusalem who's mystery Babylon. All right. And then the fourth bullet point is that this particular wicked entity reaches its climax of rebellion by embracing the man of lawlessness. And that's the point that brings this topic to our interest. Mystery Babylon, let me back up. Unfaithful Israel is not a surprise to God. God has observed and watched in disappointment as Israel over and over and over and over and over and over, you get the point, played the harlot. Do a word search. Pull up your favorite concordance or your online tool that allows you to do little word searches from the Bible and type in played the harlot. That expression, played, past participle, the harlot, P-L-A-Y-E-D, played the harlot. And notice how many times it's used in the Bible and see who it is applied to. God put up with Israel's unfaithfulness over and over and over again, and he's still putting up with it today. National Israel is still in open rebellion against her Messiah. She rejected Yeshua 2,000 years ago. She has not yet nationally and corporately embraced him as Messiah. Ask any rabbi today who's the Messiah. They will tell you it's certainly not that J guy. It's not him. Israel's still blinded to who her Messiah is. She must go through a radical transformation. Covenantally speaking, she must become the woman that God envisioned her to be all along. And this reaches its climax during the 70th week of Daniel, is my point. She will embrace the ultimate competitor to Jesus, the Antichrist. The ultimate competitor to Christ, the Antichrist. Not like she hasn't been embracing other false messiahs. She's had her share of false leaders here and there, political leaders that promised this and that and never came through on their promises. They lived, they died, they didn't resurrect. But Jesus has made promises to Israel that she can bank on. She just doesn't know it yet. So, unfortunately, before she one day embraces Yeshua, she will first embrace the man of sin. So before she embraces, I like to say it this way, before she embraces the law, before she embraces the sinless man, she will embrace the man of sin. Right? That's how it works. Okay, we got about 15 minutes left. Let's move a little bit further, and then I'm going to find a breaking point here, because I don't want to. I know I can't finish all of this in one sitting, and I'm fine with making it a little shorter. So, in the end, when we look at Revelation 17 and 18, in terms of Mystery Babylon, we see that it describes eventually her destruction with maximal finality. Right? Notice the language that John uses that, again, do your cross-referencing. You'll see that it's borrowed directly from those Tanakh passages that use ancient Babylon as its subject, or Jerusalem as its subject, or sometimes even Tyre as its subject when it talks about how final this destruction will be. But nevertheless, it applies all of these themes to the final city known as Mystery Babylon. She's found no more, right? I put all these in quotes to show that they're straight from the Bible. She's found no more. The sound of harpists, no more. The light of a lamp, no more. And I just picked on the ones that said no more. The voice of the bridegroom, no more. And so, again, initially, this is what stopped me in my tracks from considering Jerusalem as the candidate for Mystery Babylon, just like Joel Richardson still does, as far as I know. I haven't caught up with him to see if he currently has perhaps maybe adjusted his stance on who he thinks Mystery Babylon is. I think he endorses Mecca or something like that, given the fact that he wrote the book entitled The Islamic Antichrist. But the possibility of Jerusalem being Mystery Babylon just was hidden from my view because of details such as the ones we're reading in front of us right now. Mystery Babylon is said to be found no more. No more joy, no more harpists, no more voice of the bridegroom, no more light of a lamp. And yet Israel will be brought to a place of preeminence. And so how can the no mores apply to Jerusalem if it's not true that there will be a no more for Jerusalem? There will be a more, right? There's a no more for Mystery Babylon, but someday there will be a more for Jerusalem. Absolutely, there will be. So I go on to say that though in terms of what we're looking at with the no mores, such terms are not hyperbolic. They mirror the same biblical patterns used elsewhere to describe the decisive end of a sinful identity of a kingdom. Here's where, again, not just Tyre, but Edom, Babylon, Nineveh, right? This language of no more is my point, the point I'm bringing up. These terms could be prophetic hyperbole, although they don't have to be. God says these cities will be no more. But these cities, these wicked kingdoms, were destroyed, in some cases they were, even if remnants or the land itself persisted afterwards. What is the destruction that we read about when it comes to some of these wicked cities? I go on to say that under this model that I'm proposing, Revelation's annihilation language applies to Jerusalem's harlot identity, not to the cessation of the city's physical existence. Although, don't get me wrong, and I don't want you to misunderstand, I'm kind of peeking at the next topic because I can hear the objections now. People are saying, but wait a minute, Ariel. If you read Revelation 17 and 18, Mystery Babylon is physically destroyed. There's fire. She's burned. There's immense day of the Lord judgment that rains down on her. You know, the 100 talent hailstones and things like that, 100 pounds, I can't remember. So what do we make of that? Isn't there a physical destruction? How can, Ariel, you say that the annihilation language is primarily the identity language, not necessarily the physical existence? Okay, I'm going to start dealing with those next time in my point 5, the paradox resolved, destruction and restoration. Yes, there is destruction language, but we need to understand the nature of the destruction language, how God uses this destruction language to speak of the cessation of the identity, at the same time allowing for physical destruction at some level. There is a merging of those two, but I'm going to try to sort it out carefully. So we got about 12 minutes left. I'm going to stop early at point number 5 here. We'll pick this up next week. Like I said, this is about 9 points long, so I envisioned going through half of it and then doing the other half the next week, and that kind of worked out exactly where I wanted it. We're about halfway through the notes. We're through point 1 through 4, and we're ready to now do the rest 5 through 9 starting next week. But that'll do it for Eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events. Let's turn to a Trinitarian response to biblical Unitarianism. My name is Ariel ben-Lyman, HaNaviy. This is the final 30 minutes in the hour-and-a-half long study known as Live Internet Studies. The first hour-long segment is entitled Eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events. We're now ready to turn to this final 30-minute segment. We're dealing with Trinitarian passages that are being challenged by the biblicalunitarian.com website, and they have created the list. And the passage we're in right now is Matthew 4:10. Out of the NIV from their website, it reads, Jesus said to him, away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Biblicalunitarian.com objects to the Trinitarian reading in which your average Trinitarian would interpret this passage as Jesus being God based on the syllogism of A, the Bible teaches that God alone can be worshipped. That's premise 1. Premise 2, the Bible teaches that Jesus is worshipped. Thus, conclusion following from premise 1 and 2 is that Jesus must be God, because God alone can be worshipped. God exclusively can be worshipped or must be worshipped. And because Jesus is shown to be worship, receiving worship in the Bible, this must prove that Jesus is God, because of the worship is proof of that. Biblical Unitarian says no. So they object on a few different levels. But what do they believe primarily theologically? I'll read this, I always do. Biblical Unitarian presents the Father as the sole true God, the Son as the human Messiah distinct from God, and the Holy Spirit as either another name for God the Father or the divine power bestowed upon believers. That's essentially their statement of faith, or their Christological position that they're operating from. So they're non-Trinitarian, is my point. I wrote this excursus. Still stuck in segment 1 mode. Okay, no, this is not excursus. It's just a paper. A Trinitarian response to biblical Unitarianism, Matthew 4:10. Doesn't have this big long excursus-like title that takes up like half of the paper. Yes, I'm picking on myself. But in the table of contents, I attacked the context and claim of the Unitarian article and basically showed that their argument assumes these two things. Number one, that there's these fancy Greek terms that are used when Yeshua answers Satan. One of them shows up in the English as our word worship right here. It's the Greek equivalent down here. Oh, that didn't work out too well. I'll show them to you later in a moment. But worship is one Greek verb. The other Greek verb is serve. Let's try that again. Serve. There we go. So we got worship and serve. Jesus says, you shall worship and serve the Lord your God. And in the Greek, what we end up seeing is that the worship word is proskuneo, Strong's number 4352, and it's translated as worship or to bow down or to prostrate oneself. Kind of has an emphasis on the position of the body as it goes prostrate, kind of bends at the waist. The head goes down. Maybe the hands go up. Maybe the hands stay at the waist. Not sure, but either way, there's a definite posture that, when viewed from a third-person perspective or second or third-person perspective, is simply from another person's perspective. Is simply, hey, it looks like they're bowing. To that extent, especially if the context is worship, it's unmistakable. The next word that Yeshua uses in his rebuke of Satan there is serve. This is Strong's number 3000, latruo, and it can be translated as serve, like work for. In a worship context, a cultic context, it would definitely be God or a god, a deity, but it can also carry over into worship. There's a nuance there that works for both. It's because of the nature of this word being what I'm going to introduce tonight, known as a merism. Two words that kind of capture the full scope of a given concept that we're trying to express. I'll flesh that out in a moment. Don't worry. What we've done in this particular paper is moved from biblical Unitarians' objection that Jesus... Oh, it did it again. Give me a second. I know why. I think I know why, because I clicked on one of the links and that shrinks it. Okay, because it has to fetch the local file whenever it does that. Okay, their argument has two assumptions, and I refute this using one passage in Revelation. They assume that proskuneo and latreo are fundamentally different in kind. I'm going to demonstrate that they're not fundamentally different, that they actually function as I mentioned, a kind of a merism, kind of a two words that capture a necessary nuance to round out the picture for something that we're describing. Don't worry if you don't understand what that word merism means. I will explain it in a moment. But the simplest explanation is that proskuneo and latreo are related words in cultic service and worship. They go hand in hand. They work together. They also make this particular assumption. They assume that the use of these two words in Matthew 4:10 strictly limits worship to the Father alone, leaving no room for Christ to share in it. This is typical Unitarian Christology, where they make a big distinction between between God being a person that how do I say this? The person of God cannot be shared by the person of Jesus, because this would be a collapsing of the persons or a confusion of the persons. Remember, their Unitarian God is a strict monotheistic view of God. The word God can apply to the Father in the strict identity sense of the word from their perspective. And going along with that, this excludes Yeshua from being counted as the identity of God. The identity of God does not apply to Jesus. They can call Jesus God in limited aspects, they're open to that. What they sometimes fail to realize, or at least articulate, is that the model that I hold to of Trinitarian, the Trinitarian model that I hold to, known as monarchical Trinitarianism, also embraces the idea that, strictly speaking from an identity point of view, God is picking out the Father or applying to the Father, and that the word God, when applying to the Son, is either what we call predicatively or metonymically. Those are the two terms that Bo Branson and Joshua Sijuwade used. Those are two of the more vocal, famous, public monarchical Trinitarians that you're going to encounter if you're doing any research into this particular model of Trinity. But this doesn't mean that Yeshua is less than God ontologically, because ontologically there is a nature that God, the single being, possesses, and it's shared equally among the three persons without diminishing the amount that's shared by the persons or that's possessed by any given person. So Father possesses 100% deity, Son possesses 100% deity, and Spirit possesses 100% deity, and it's one deity. It's one shared nature. It's one divine nature that causes God to be God. All right, that being said, their argument begins to fall apart when it comes to strictly limiting worship and service to the Father alone, but not to God alone. This is the careful distinction that I'm making. So when we go back to looking at the book of Revelation, Biblical Unitarian says when you do a word search under proskuneo, you find proskuneo, worship, applied to Jesus, and you find it applied to God. But you also find it applied to kings and prophets and dignitaries and anyone else important, sometimes even angels. That we're just simply talking about prostrating yourself. Doesn't necessarily mean that that person's God, right? The context demands whether or not the person bowing knows that they're bowing to a deity or not. If it's a false worship, you could bow to a deity because in your blindness to the identity of that deity, then you're making that deity out to be the God of you. And thus, it's natural that you would bow to it. Well, in the Bible, it's firmly established and explained to Israel that there's only one true God of heaven and earth. There's only one creator. It doesn't matter what deities are bowed to by the surrounding nations or other people groups or pagan people groups. Those deities are non-gods, Paul tells us. They're demonic entities. You can bow to them all day long, but that doesn't make them into truly God. They are not the one true God and never will be. God has no competitors, is the point I'm trying to make. As Heiser used to say, the late Dr. Heiser, Elohim is species unique, right? There are other Elohim, just like there are other gods, but he is species unique. I'll flash a little graphic in post-production that shows him saying that Elohim, Yahweh, he's species unique, right? So you can bow to other gods all day long, but that doesn't turn them into the one true God. So the point being made by Yeshua is that because the Bible already establishes that there's only one true God, then Satan, you better get back, because God commands worship and service to him alone. And that's why Jesus can say, wow, I'm in the completely wrong verse. Oh, no, I'm in the right verse. That's Revelation 22. That's why Jesus can say, it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only. And the prohibition is the same as well. When we read in the Ten Commandments where you shall not worship other gods and bow down to them. It uses these two Greek words in the Septuagint rendering of the Ten Commandment readings to demonstrate to us that the prohibition of giving this type of service and worship to other gods is expressly forbidden, not because they truly are gods and they are competitors to God and he's jealous for that. Nope, it's because the opposite is true. They aren't gods. Why are you bowing to them? Why are you serving them? I'm the only true creator, Israel. Worship me, serve me. So we see this worship showing up throughout the Bible given to other entities, humans, angels, prophets, kings, dignitaries. Yeshua himself receives worship. However, Biblical Unitarian is correct in saying that latruo, service, is not given to Jesus in the strict narrative sense of the word, where we've got Jesus, the man, being the recipient of latruo service. But what biblical Unitarian seems to ignore or be unaware of is that in Revelation 22, John describes latruo being given to the Lamb. And let's read it here. In the English first, there will no longer be any curse, and the throne of God and of the Lamb will be in it, and its bondservants will serve him. And notice there's a single him, but there's the bondservants, a group of people serving him. And yet there's a compound subject going on. The throne sitters are two. One throne, two throne sitters, God and the Lamb. I'm not even in my notes yet. I'm still doing, this is all preliminary. Let's read the Greek real quick just so you can see, listen for the word latruo. Kai pan kathema uk estai, eti kai hatronas tu theu, kai tu arniu in aute estai, kai hoi duloi autu latrususin auto. And when I go looking at the interlinear that I was reading from there, we see right here, Strong's number 3000, latrususin is the word that I'm highlighting, latruo, that's the root word, and it is a plural only because of the douloi earlier is also a plural. The servants of him will serve. They will serve is literally. So, and the servants of him, they will serve. Kai hoi douloi autu latrususin. And they, the servants of him, singular, they, plural, servants, plural, of him, singular, will serve him, auto, singular pronoun. Well, the question that's going to be examined in my study is, who's the him? Is the him God, like biblical Unitarian wants me to believe, God the Father? Or like we Trinitarians read it, is the him the Lamb? Or is it God in the sense that the Lamb shares the nature of God and thus is God, and the singular pronoun, just like in the Tanakh, will apply to God or Yahweh, knowing that there's multiple persons involved, but we don't have to stretch the pronouns out to be multiple, because we're still talking about the single God, who's the single pronoun. That's kind of what we're gonna look at tonight. So we're ready to jump into summary and conclusion, point number 6, and this will begin to push us into the final points that I want to bring to your attention. We've got about 15 minutes left, so this is kind of like a good halfway point for the video. So if you're watching the video and this turns out to be video 1, stay tuned for part 2 or video 2 as we continue looking at Matthew 4:10 through the lens of a Trinitarian versus non-Trinitarian discussion, okay? All right, welcome back to a Trinitarian response to biblical Unitarianism. If this is video 2 that you're watching, then we are continuing our look at Matthew 4:10, where Jesus rebukes Satan and reminds him that you should worship and serve the Lord alone. Is Jesus including himself in that worship and service? Biblical Unitarian, a non-Trinitarian Christian denomination, says no. Jesus is not included there because worship and service belong to God alone. And God here refers to Father. And thus they say we don't find Bible verses that explain using the word serve to Jesus, the Greek being latruo. But we do find words being applied to Jesus, the proskuneo, the worship word that we have in our English. We find that. But this doesn't turn him into God, because the proof from in their logic, the proof that worshiping Jesus doesn't make him a God is that other beings in the Bible are worshiped. Angels, prophets, kings. Heck, here in Asia, we bow down to everybody. Anybody you meet that you've never met before, you can bow to them. Doesn't matter how old or young they are or what their social position is. You can bow to them. It's simply a form of address out here. It's the way we Americans shake hands and wave our hands when we say hi, right? Well, in Korea, they just bow, right? They don't reach out and touch the other guy's hand and shake their hand. Although they do that. They don't get me wrong. My point is, wow, we're bowing to everybody out here. Does that mean we're turning everybody into God, or we're acknowledging that they're God? No, and no. And biblical Unitarians trying to kind of say that same thing. Yeah, people are bowing to everybody all over the place. It's a kind of an ancient Near Eastern custom, bowing and bowing and bowing, right? Kind of like it happens over here. So biblical Unitarian says this doesn't turn Jesus into God. But let's look at my summary conclusion and summarize the Greek. Can the Greek grammar alone determine who the him is in Revelation 22:3? Because in Revelation, as I mentioned in video 1, contrary to what biblical Unitarian wants us to imagine, the word service, latruo, does apply to Jesus when we understand that Jesus is the Lamb in the book of Revelation. But we also must make the understanding in our application from the nuance of the hymns, the ambiguous, the equivocal hymns in that verse, that the him can apply to Jesus and God as a singular pronoun. That's where it's necessary to see that Jesus is being worshipped. Otherwise, biblical Unitarian's point would stand that the him there applies to God, and that the service is to God, just like it is in the Tanakh, a singular pronoun used over several thousand times. And thus, there's no confusion in their mind that the him is applying to God. And since God applies to Father in the New Testament, then they're assuming that God must apply to Father here as well. And I'm going to grant them that argument because it's logical. It's valid, and it's even sound to some degree. All right, summary of the Greek analysis. Can Greek grammar alone determine who the him pronouns referred to in Revelation 22:3? All right, grammatically, the Greek of Revelation 22:3 does not allow us to determine with certainty whether the pronoun auto, him, refers specifically to God, to the Lamb, or to both together. Full stop. Yes, the biblical Unitarian objection has some legs to stand on. If you look at the Greek and look at the verse, there will no longer be any curse, and the throne of God and of the Lamb will be in it, and his, God's, bondservants will serve him, God. That is consistent with an Old Testament reading where the word God is a reference to the Father, or to Yahweh, and the pronouns are in the singular. I mean, it's all throughout the Tanakh. And as a monarchical Trinitarian, I'm telling you that I don't have a problem with identifying that person as the Father either, because I'm recognizing God as the source, the arche, the monoarche in monarchical Trinitarianism, is that God is the source of the nature. Father begets the Son, and Father sends the Spirit. And so he's the source. I get that. And we can refer to Father as the him in that respect as well. But something that biblical Unitarian doesn't take account for, which I as a Trinitarian do, is that the word God can be equivocated upon, and it must be based on certain passages where we read that Jesus is God without collapsing the identity of Son into Father. We recognize as Trinitarians that Jesus' identity as God is at that nature level, because Jesus shares equally in the nature that God, his Father, possesses. And so that's why we say predicatively or metonymically he is referred to as God. So now we read the verse this way: there will be no longer any curse in the throne of God, the Father, and of the Lamb, or God the Father and of the Lamb, who both share the same nature, will be in it. And his, who's the his, or what is the is? The is the equivocal explanation or implication of that single nature that God possesses and shares equally among Son and Spirit. And they all share in that single nature, and thus they're all one God. One God, three persons. So the one God the bondservants of the one God will serve that one God. And so this is consistent with the Trinitarian reading. There will no longer be any curse, and the throne of that single God and of that single God's Messiah, remember Jesus is fully human as well, so meaning the Lamb, will be in it. And God, the bondservants of God, not two gods, the bondservants of this single God will serve him, and that's how we read it. So the Unitarians don't have a problem agreeing that there's a single God in the passage. But does the Greek force us into their position? All right, grammatically, the Greek of Revelation 23 does not allow us to determine with certainty whether the pronoun auto, him, refers specifically to God, to the Lamb, or to both together. The construction allows either reading. The ultimate referent must be determined by context, not grammar, and the immediate context strongly suggests a joint referent consistent with the shared throne motif, right? We already have the passage introducing the throne of God and of the Lamb. That's what John wrote. We don't have to shy away from that. And so the shared throne motif pushes us into the unified rule of Father and Son that we arrive at as biblical Trinitarians. There's no reason for us to downplay Yeshua's role here because of the way that God expresses his disallowing or non-allowal of anyone to share in his glory and in his worship and in his service. The exclusivity of God's covenant position in the eyes of Israel has already been established, so much so that to bring Jesus into the preeminent place of sitting on the very throne of God forces us to come to the conclusion that either A, God changed his mind and has allowed a lesser deity to share his throne, or B, Jesus is not competing with his Father in terms of deity. There's a single deity. And I take the second conclusion. So let's begin to work through some of this. Let's look at the Greek text in point number 6.1. Revelation 22:3, NASB in Greek. We looked at this earlier, but I'll read it one more time. There will no longer be any curse, and the throne of God and of the Lamb will be in it, and his bondservants will serve him. What I did this time is I highlighted the English words in bold that correspond to their Greek counterparts so you can see them in this fashion. When we look at the Greek, it says, kai pan katathama uk estai etikai kai hatranos tu theu kai tu aroniu. That's the throne of God and of the Lamb. And then continues, in aute estai kai hoi duloi autu la trusus in auto. And you can see from my highlights from the English over to the Greek, we have this big long phrase, the throne of God and of the Lamb is the tu theu kai tu aroniu. And then we have the his bondservants, that's the autu, the his version. And then we have the serve him, the auto. So, keywords. Let's look at the words that I've highlighted here for us in my notes. Tu theu kai tu aroniu, of God and of the Lamb. Autu, his in the genitive singular. Auto, him in the dative singular. And moving past that Greek, all the pronouns are singular. That's the point that Biblical Unitarian wants to school me on. They're like, hey, Mr. Trinitarian, if there's two persons, why aren't the pronouns plural? I mean, I hear this from Biblical Unitarians all the time, ad nauseum. They're like, look at the Old Testament. This is my funny voice to imitate a Biblical Unitarian, okay? Look at the Old Testament. It just has all these pronouns, and they're all singular, and that means that there's one God, and there's one person. Case closed. And I'm like, not so fast there. We Trinitarians do believe there's one God. So, doesn't mean it's a strict monotheism, but it does mean it's monotheism, but not in a strict sense. Remember, we Trinitarians are monotheists as well. So your argument that there's only one God, as illustrated by the single pronouns, is a weak and empty argument to us as Trinitarians. Yeah, of course there's a single pronoun, because it's one God. What would you expect? You expect it to be like gender fluid pronouns, multiple pronouns, or whatever it happens today with all the nonsense where we get the theys and the thems and stuff. It's one person, but it's they. No, why? God doesn't have to yield to that type of confusion. He's one God, so he chooses to express himself in the pronoun sense as one, singular. I don't have a problem with that. We're Trinitarians are completely on board with that. Stop using that argument, you non-Trinitarians. It's not working on us, okay? You're spinning your wheels in a direction that's not necessary. All the pronouns are singular, even though the single throne is described as belonging to two occupants, God and the Lamb. The pronouns are singular in the rest of the Tanakh. So what? It's one God. All right, move on past that. Expand your argument. Let's go somewhere where we haven't gone before. 6.2, we'll pick this up next week. Greek grammar does not force a choice between whether it is talking about God the Father or Jesus the Son. In other words, it's not a person. It doesn't have to be forced into a person discussion. And when I say it, we're talking about Revelation 22:3. There will no longer be any curse in the throne of God and of the Lamb will be in it. And his. Who's the his? Who's the him? Which person is the question referring to? I reject the question because it presumes that it's a person distinction that must be the him, his, and him. It doesn't have to be a person distinction is my point. Just like the single pronouns in the Tanakh don't always have to be a person distinction, although I'm comfortable with with it being a person distinction if it's necessary for us to make that distinction, but it doesn't always have to be. So we're going to stop there and pick this up next week and keep going with the biblical Trinitarian refutation of biblical Unitarians' answer to Matthew 4:10 about worshiping Jesus as God. Is it possible? Can we do it? And does it turn him into God if we worship him? We'll pick this up next week, but that'll do it for a Trinitarian response to biblical Unitarianism. Let's close in prayer. Abba, I bless your name and thank you for the students and for the ministry that you've given me the responsibility to govern, to shepherd, to take care of, to administer. The YouTube channels, my website, the newsletters, the ministry through email where people go back and forth and ask me questions. The audio podcasts that get uploaded. Lord, it's a blessing to interact with people and grow in that process. I know I don't have all the answers, but I do recognize that your words, and I affirm this with a perfect conviction, that your words do have all the answers. And even though I don't understand all of those answers, I am beholden to the text, as Dr. James I would say. I will continue to press in and avail myself of its resources because I cannot exhaust its depth. I just can't get enough of your word. So thank you for this opportunity to share my thoughts with other students. Bless us this week. Be with us. Continue to protect us and provide for us as your people. And we'll be careful to give you the praise and the glory. B'Shem Yeshua. Amen.